to get both of it. But I think now we are broadcasting. So, like, wanted to say hello to everybody and also introduce Alan from the Dei Aurea Praeterita. How do you say that exactly?
Praeterita.
Praeteria.
Yeah, try to use the first word is based on Praetorian.
Ah, okay.
It's a compound Latin word that I made up because it means golden age past. Dei Aurea Praeterita means golden age past, but it was the past that was ruled by, rod of iron.
That's pretty interesting. I like that we both have Latin acronyms for nicknames and things. That's pretty cool. So we've been talking a lot about this mud flood and Tartaria stuff, but there's just so many angles to it, and some people have, been saying, "Oh, I have to like look in just this one direction." And I think that it's like kind of more important to look into all the other directions, and if that makes sense. So I really liked your channel, and I wanted to talk more about that. I'm gonna go like to your channel right now, actually, and look at it for the web stream. Dei Aurea.
If you just put in FINDAP or Flat Earth Nation, the one Flat Earth Nation that just got put up as Flat Earth Nation, it only has like 20 subscribers, but there's a picture that says the Hughes Matrix, and that's a picture I took when I was a little boy of Johnny Cash.
Oh, whoa.
When he was walking through a casino, I think it was the Silver Slipper. My dad was working on the nukes test sites up there in North Nevada.
Wow.
Living in North Las Vegas.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, my take is I want to keep people from going to Atlantis when the Bible is a viable option.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's kind of the thing that a lot of people, they need to understand about this, is that it's looking for a biblical reason for it's not just being a metaphor, because a lot of people can accept metaphor, but there's actual stuff here that's scientific. And there's a lot that's, it corresponds with a lot of contemporary science and stories. One thing that we were talking about earlier that I wanted to bring up was Robert Anton Wilson's Illuminatus trilogy, because he does talk about the Atlantis Society, and he has this really interesting myth about the wild man, and it's basically the fur-covered men that, they're are the descendants of Lemuria and then live in Atlantis. But they have a bunch of pictures all over Europe, and you see this, on castles. William Rampurst Castle has fur-covered men all over it. It's something I always wondered about when I was a kid. And, there's a big thing in the Epic of Gilgamesh about the wild men and the furless king, and the differences once he's been, once he's had Isis inject herself into him, then he no longer is as wild, and he loses his fur. But it's a weird thing, because in the Atlantis mythology, especially in the Illuminatus book, they talk about how the law of Atlantis was very different than it is today. Or, well, actually, it's very similar than it is today, but it's very different than it was in a Christian society. And it was the law of do what thou wilt. So it was to experiment and to create whatever you could create, because man was the synthetic natural thing. So what could be a natural? But eventually magicians created a race of bald white monkeys, and this is something that they talk about in the book of Jacob. And one of them was like, hey, I don't really like that, because I resemble that remark. I am a freak, and there's a lot of other freaks, and we don't really like being the freaks that we are. So like maybe we should change our societal rules. I have an idea. It should be something else, as this Gruob character, who's this bald monkey with a blonde head, and he has this rule. He says that we should do what is right to do, and call that good, and not do what is wrong to do, because that would be evil. So it becomes this dichotomy between the do what thou wilt and the do the right thing society, which there are people that still try to bring us back to this Atlantis society, but it comes with this do what thou wilt, ruling, which is very antithetical And there's a lot of iconography in our society about that, especially in kids' movies.
Well, the Hegelian dialectic that would be opposed to do what thou wilt would be for the people that, like, of the Bible, even when they said, okay, we're not going to have a judge, this didn't work, the Bible would say, and every man did what was right in his own eyes.
Yeah,
now,
well,
see,
what is right?
Difference. Well, we have that is how, it's not just the Hebrews that understood, don't kill, don't steal. That's my wife. I mean, the code of Hammurabi, everybody that's a freshman that's ever went to Bible scholar or Bible school has studied that and realized that even the heathen and the pagans in the Bible, they still loved the people that loved them. They were nice to the people that were nice to them. They brought gifts to the people that brought them gifts. And if they were invited to a big party, guess what? You could expect to be invited to a big party. They're just like us, except the whole concept is do what thou wilt is wrong.
And dangerous.
Do what is right in your own eyes is one thing. And then it all comes down to, okay, did it, so everybody believes something like that, but only one Hebrew church was ever said, I'm taking the worst people in the world and I'm going to make them rule the world for a short period just to show that I'm God and I can do it. So he took a stiff-necked people and he made them a God. And he came in the flesh and performed miracles and everything else that said, this is the man that's different. This is the one. And it turned the world upside down. And here we are today. Still coming down to people saying, well, it's all about competition. So if I've got to rate this guy and take his money, well, he should have been smarter and done better due diligence. And that's what I'm trying to say. We're still living in Bible times that we're going to be judged for, down to things like that.
That's something also that's pretty interesting. You've talked about that it's really hard to wrap the head around, but it's a fantastic thing, is that not only are we living in biblical times, but biblical times are more similar to the times now than this sort of Jesuit imaginary desert of nothingness that we're supposed to imagine had like lack of civility and of bathhouses. But like clearly we see them all over Africa and in the Semitic areas, that they had great civilization.
20,000 public fountains in Mohenjo-Daro.
And so it's just absurd for us to be told, and to pretend that these people were uncivilized. It's just literally insane. But also the idea of this calendar thing. So the transposing of the Star Fort Society of the Crusades over instead of that 2,000 year ago desert myth, it's kind of interesting that this idea that there was Christ in Damascus visiting cities, and that it makes the donkey story that much more interesting.
He rode that donkey because it was his choice. It was a sign of honor that we don't understand today. But we see the pictures of those star forts. We live shabbily compared to them.
Oh man, and you were saying something interesting about star forts. There was the forces. You had read something.
I was just going over today in Daniel 11 verses 35 and 37, and I think that might give you some answers. It gave me some real answers about the genetic manipulation, and if there was ever a verse that would prove it, it is the one. I'm going to skip the one about and go right to the God of forces, because I did do a word study on that, and that could very easily read that they serve the God of star forts.
So I'm here. I just opened up Daniel 11, where he said, which it's like 30. Where was it?
38.
38.
It says, but his estate shall he honor the God of forces. And these are the same people that fell in 35 and started making people.
Right.
And I hate to admit it, I raised 4 kids in Chicagoland in the suburbs. And Minister Farrakhan is big there. And we used to just laugh at that whole Yakub making white people with blue eyes, and they were blue devils. And I don't want to get into it because white people can be saved. We are just as savable as everybody else, and we are all one blood. And the whole deception is there should be no race wars. There should never have been any of this genocide. We're one blood. We're one people. And as soon as it starts going towards, the survival of the fittest and Darwinism and away from God, you're only left with one option, and that's that the whites are number one, baby. And I want it to be we're all equal.
Yeah, it seems like that you've got something really interesting here in this Daniel 11 book in the Bible, because a lot of the people, they think of the Bible kind of like comic books. And you got to be a comic book nerd to see how valuable a comic book is, but it's a lot of stuff in a book like this. And so you found this. I'm trying to find the part where it's white. The white.
That's verse 35.
Yeah, right there. Now, when they shall fall, they shall be holpen with a little help, but many shall cleave to them for flatteries, and some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them and to purge and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. And that's kind of interesting because it's another example of literal truth in the Bible, because you look into the chances of, I'm trying to see how I would look this up, but like blonde, blue-eyed, haploid type. And you can see that essentially all of the blonde, blue-eyed people come from, at some point, theoretically, one person. But when two have been produced and then they get together, it's almost inevitable that they will have blue eyes. And the blonde hair is another example. But this is something that, we were talking about being a result of albinoism, but it's not the only. Sorry?
Before we get into albinism, I just want to go in for some of the nerds, and that in your concordance, it's number 3835 for that they will be made white. It is a very rare use of that word white, and it doesn't mean the white like snow. That's number 6703, and it doesn't mean that you're light complected like in the Song of Solomon. David would have been light complected according to the girl who's singing, and he said he's that white. He's sunny white, like bread, like
absolutely not deathly white.
Right, but he was that type of white. So there are words for white, just like there were words for fort, but they chose forces. Just like, and the word 3835 has its root to be becoming white as bricks are made white, like the same megaliths that we see on all of the cathedrals and everything. When they're gleaming, the white ones, they're being made like that. So those people were turned that white, and the only time white's not used a lot in the Bible, but half the time it's bad when it turns white, because that means you're getting leprosy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I'm at, and I'm satisfied with where I'm at. I don't have to know everything about what Yakub was up to. All I know is the star forts that we used to think, they built them because they were great and they were going to bring cymatic, harmonic energy. They could just be bringing demons and part of the fallen, because that is the root words are nothing but for strength and for fortress and for, they worshipped that. They were going to be secure in their cities, and
that's a fascinating thing that I've been trying to figure out how to. It feels sometimes like everybody thinks everybody else is wrong, and they don't see how each other are right. So often there's these two pillars going on. So some people are arguing, oh well, the flat earthers and the spiritualists and stuff, what do they know about? Nothing, because it's all about aliens. It's like, well, wait a second, buddy. Like, do you get physics and the metaphysics of outer and inner space? Like, clearly there's a correlation between the two fields. And right now is the time when they're saying that there is grass growing on the moon. I don't know if you've read that, but the Chinese are apparently. Yeah, that's a new one, right? The Chinese say that they're growing plants. And then, oh, by the way, we've been doing this since we were there in the year of the rabbit. Big deal. What? You know? Yeah, by the way.
One up on America.
And someone got a.
They've lost their telemetry data is gone too, right?
Well, that's another weird thing. You need to check out the pictures, because they have all these pictures of a place. And so I have a video that I'm going to come out with pretty soon, which is probably going to, blow some people's minds, but at the same time, I think you'll follow me on where this is going. It has a lot to do with Jesuit meditation and how you can't bring anything unless you're in a DeLorean, So there kind of is a reality to these realms that they're creating, because we're creating them.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. People that don't believe in God or don't believe in the devil don't believe in either, and so they end up thinking that it's completely okay because they've materialized it in some way. Okay, it's far away. First off, it's not inside of you. Second off, when you get there, it's going to be physical. It's going to be a thing that's separate. And these are the things that make people feel comfortable with it. But there's not a lot of difference between this and the 19th century occult. And especially if you look at the new rockets.
China is nobody to mess with either.
Yeah.
Right? Well, even our own country, we make a mistake when we think because Satan has got this is such a great deception. But we see that even though they're two heads on the same snake, like the Clintons and the Trumps, they still fight each other. It might some be pretend, but I don't think the Chinese are pretending.
So do you think that there's any...
It wasn't for the Chinese.
So at what point...
I don't think the Chinese have any better plans for us than the Americans do. At
what point of corruption does... how absolute does power have to be to corrupt absolutely? And that's something I've been kind of thinking about. There's got to... I've been to Burning Man. I've seen these kids of the elite who would say, "You're wrong, Dad. This is how you worship the devil." And they light, the Wicker Man on fire with neon, and they think it's different because they're vegetarians again. But that's what I wonder is how many times are they trying to be good and they've paved roads to hell with good intention? And is there a chance, is there some way that they can be redeemed? Because I'd like to think that part of what helps these people sleep at night, even though clearly the president doesn't sleep more than 4 hours a night or something, what is the end game to help them sleep at night? It's probably to not go to hell, right? Isn't, and maybe...
Well, let me put it to you this way. They're trying as hard as they can to figure this out. Now, when I've gone to my vision quest and things like that, I was dealing with people that were coming from around the world to do peyote, and they're all great spiritual people. And the judgment of God is not going to start with them. It's going to start in the house of God with the people that have turned this world off to the possibility that Christianity could be a joyous experience.
Right. That's something also interesting, I think, is Occidental mythology. People think of Christianity still in this really very rigid paradigm and not in sort of this, the mystic schools.
Such a wrong view of it. Yeah, they instead of viewing it as
the trippiest religion.
Are we under the law or grace? When the Bible clearly says we're under the grace and we live by the spirit of the law. We know we're going to stumble a day. But as long as our heart is towards God and the spirit of the law, we're good. There's a couple of things he doesn't want us to do. Fornicate, drink blood, eat food that's strangled. No problem. I don't want to eat food that's strangled anyway. I think that's just crazy the way they kill food nowadays.
So also there's a lot of things though that I think people think about how a lot of what we're told as a kid, it's oh well, Christ was made a martyr, but then it's at the same time they've been able to take over all the iconography and symbolism. So it makes you wonder what is the real character and which is this actor and when is this actor from? How many centuries ago? And what do you think they looked like? And that's a question I have for you.
I think that he was indigenous.
Right. So.
And that's, I don't want to, we know what tribe he was from. I've said before, that LeBron James is probably from the tribe of Judah, or something like that, But
yeah.
all I really know is that Jesus Christ was an indigenous. He was not a white person.
Right.
And when I go against racism, and white people are bad, I do kind of get carried away to where people can think I'm just picking on them, but I'm not. What I'm saying is we have to realize, just like we were talking about the fake moon landing and we all thought we understood cosmology, we all have been fed that Darwinism all our life. And so I'm just talking to Christians now.
So who do you think this
white of the world believes in Darwinism?
Right. And which is basically just Blavatskyism. I mean, they're or something that like, yeah. So what do you think about this white character whom is the Da Vinci, feminine, androgynous, kind of Luciferian looking? What do you think about this character? Is this
the Vitruvian Man?
Right.
Well, Vitruvian Man, he based that on drawings of proportionality that were 1,000 years old.
Well, but not just the Vitruvian 5 arms, but all of the Christ-like Vitruvians, where you got like marble holding Christ. So you've got Christ holding.
I think they used that one Demichi as a model, and just popped it up there, breaking the commandments that don't make an image of God.
So
they really cared about it anyway.
So I tend to think that there actually is a character that is being manipulated to replace Yeshua, and I don't think it's just an actor like a model. I think that this blonde person might have been the the anti-Christ. I mean, right? The other character and they're trying to superimpose its legacy. And what is it? It's very especially Da Vinci, and got this very feminine, androgynous. Often almost pregnant in some pictures, and
you know who I say that is though?
Mary
Magdalene. It was Barabbas.
Oh.
Barabbas would have been in my timeline Frederick Barbarossa the First.
Huh. So
could you
explain that a little bit? Like for people that don't know what he's talking about, Barabbas is the person. They said, "Bring me Barabbas."
Well, Barabbas was the person on the cross that they thought would make a better Christ, and Barabbas, I don't think, just went away, because I put it all down to that Jesus walked into a world where, when he fled to Egypt, it was already on, because the deceiver tried to destroy the flood, the child and the mother, the Virgin Mary and Jesus. But it says in Revelation that the earth swallowed the water, and it wasn't the flood that covered the whole earth, but it was the flood that exposed the antediluvian canals, like the Erie Canal and things that I've studied, that they didn't build, they just cleaned out and started using again.
And that's also the black sun, right? Like that's during the hill when the body's raised from the graves, and there's a black sun, correct? Is that the same?
I have to admit, I don't know.
I feel like that's something from Luke. I'll have to, I need to get up on my game on this. Apparently, it's in.
Well, the swallowing of the water, I think, is in Revelation 12. It's like a preview of what happened when Jesus was born, and it says that, and after that, the dragon was lost. And so, that to me was the world Jesus walked into. They knew something was up. John the Baptist went first, and he said, "It's this wicked generation. The root is already laid to the axe." And so, unless the Battle of Armageddon and the destruction of 70 AD happened in that generation, he worshipped the Lord Jesus in vain, because he lied. he said he was coming back in that generation exclusively. The people that wrote to the Thessalonians, the book of Revelation, James, they all told those people, hold on unto death. That would be unconscionable if they didn't mean it.
Well, I mean, so that's that time also. So I'm just playing now with this calendar revision stuff, but I was looking at the year 492, and granted, there's a lot of other years, and it might not be exactly 1,000 in difference, but 492 is also the year of the Justin and the Assyrian War, where Justin's defeating the Scythians, and there's also a schism in the calendar, in the Acacian Schism. So that's kind of interesting because the Eastern and Western churches.
And if you add 1,000 years to that, or take it away,
yeah,
1492.
Right, yeah, and that's my main thought.
You were an expert on 1492, as you proved this afternoon in your video.
So it seems like a 492, or at least in that era, right? I'm thinking there could be 30 years differences in certain circumstances, but something about 1,000 years difference, there could be shuffled calendars. So another thing that's interesting about 492 is the Pope Felix III wrote 2 letters, one to King Zeno of Acacius, and if the L. Ron Hubbard stuff with Scientology, Zenu, and so I was looking a little bit into Zeno, and apparently there's a lot here that seems like it could be like with the whirling dervishes, and like the in the sky, those in the sky.
Before I forget, I just want to add one thing about the Book of Revelation. It does have a point into it. It says, and there will be time no more.
Mm-hmm.
It just means, for that, it doesn't mean, my clock stopped working. It means that you're not going to be able to go back chronologically and say, I've got a set for it for sure.
Right.
Because the winners of the war, right, the history, I don't trust Pliny.
Yeah, that's funny that everybody's just now seeming to catch up with you on that. And I've been saying that for years because of the Mayan calendar. It's not the end of the world, it's the end of history. Because when, Mandela effect shifts and people can, I don't know if you've seen this great movie I recommend, it's called Primer. And it was made in 2004 by this guy for $7,000 in Texas. Like, he's completely by hand. He's a math teacher. And he just shot it and made it with his friends in his garage, basically. But it's all about these 2 guys that figure out how to essentially create a time machine that, when you're inside of it, it will work, but it can only go back to the time it's been turned on. And that this is a big thing about time travel, is this idea that they can set backup dates to using things like CERN to go back to the acceleration of atoms out from the Big Bang, or at least in a hell dimension or something. But that is kind of the concept. So
well, I laughed at the Mandela effect for years until they changed the Bragg's apple cider vinegar, because I've been that kind of guy all my life, and I know that it used to be Bragg's.
So what did they do to Bragg's? I actually haven't seen that yet. What did they?
Bragg, now it's just Bragg.
No way. No way. Oh, that's ridiculous.
It's only Bragg now.
I'm with you on that. I remember that in 2010 even. Like, I haven't really paid attention in a while, but I definitely remember Bragg's. That's crazy.
Yeah. So that's the first one that I couldn't say, okay, I can't pretend I don't know that one. A lot of them, like Luke, I'm your father. That's obviously not a Mandela effect. That's one that they just put out to play with us.
Right. They can do stuff like that.
I remember that used to be a big, that's like Rich Little, the old mimic, doing Sam Spade. Sam Spade never said played against Sam. And people that do pop trivia knew those things, and we won a lot of money on it,
Well, so that's another thing that gets me into the Illuminatus trilogy. And actually, I have a friend in Germany, and I told him I'm going to have him on the show, and he decided he's going to reread the books because he's a big fan also. So we're going to get into this thing about the fjord. So, fjord, and there's a lot of people who believed at one point that Ford was called Fjord with a J. And so what they ended up doing was putting into the book the idea of the Fnords. And it's kind of like originally you know, in the 50s.
You're saying Henry Ford spelled his name that way?
Yeah, and then in the 50s, it changed because of like one of the atomic alignments, which is anytime that there's an atomic alignment, a cracking of an atom, right? Like that's like a little mini Big Bang thing. That's when we get a little shift because it's God's Big Bang out. It's like mice traps that are bombarding out, and so there's a certain pachinko effect, right? The pachinko machine. It's an algorithm of just chaos, but it's not completely chaotic. There's like a kind of is you ain't happening binary, kind of like your screen of what happens, and so there's little shifts sometimes, but there's symmetry because there's only so many ways things can work. You're not going to get too many universes with triangular suns. But that's because of that, you're going to find that theoretically, according to their idea of science, that there's going to be other planets in not just other dimensions, but in this very one expanded out from this one that are identical to this one because it's just probability that it would evolve that way, right? That's a big part of their plan. So the idea is that a lot of people remember believing that they're from the line words out where the word was fjord, and they say fjord in the game and in the Illuminatus thing, but a lot of people in the 50s really they remembered it, and then after about the time of the Etzel car came out, that's when everything shifted, something like that, and people immediately it's all different, just called Ford, and then there's Ford starts having problems, and it's all correlated.
That's just too much, man. That's just right. I'm thinking like, have you ever like the story of Tucker? As soon as he put out a better car, they realized the competition is over. They don't really. The same companies that made it through in between the wars, Kleenex, Campbell's, Ford, they're still the ones that came in after. It has to be something about World War I, World War II, where we went from the Victorian age in 1913, where women wore their collar up to their neck and, guys would put their handkerchiefs down in mud, to World War I. And the girl's name that started Planned Parenthood is Margaret Sanger.
Right.
She was arrested for using birth control in 1914. She opened a clinic where she couldn't do abortions, but she started promoting them in 1915. And we went right after the war into the flapper era, the gangster era. They didn't want
the drugs.
Cars run on hemp oil and
grain
oil.
They turned everything into drugs. Yeah, they got rid of all the natural.
Banned everything. The Federal Reserve was founded in 1913. In between the wars, gold was confiscated in 1933. They the numbers for the Holocaust. They planned the Jewish occupation in Jerusalem. They set it up in 1918 when the World War I was over, but it wasn't over. There was just an armistice. Just like there's an armistice after Korea today that is still the dividing point where time goes on. And what else is the kicker, Andreas? There's still the same queen on the throne since World War II.
Right.
It just happened. Everything just happened.
That is interesting. And her brother, is it her brother or her father, who ended up in abdicating the throne to live in Bahamas, and the Bahamas are where the trusts are. Right, and that's an interesting thing about
the Bahamas and the Philippines, I think.
Yeah, the King Philip Islands. But the thing about the Caribbean is that there's a lot of kingdoms there, and that's a big, for whatever reason, kingdoms from these from the way back are still respected. But for some reason, the Queen of England respected the Haile Selassie's, to bow to Haile Selassie. Just shows that there's something.
The last emperor of the Abyssinian Empire.
There's a certain amount of respect that they still have in courts. So there's something to it, but the Gilded Age came out of it, and like we sort of like we sort of had this time when the Crusades happened that people had to leave their things in the possession of. I touched on this a little bit in the video, but I want to go on another video talking just about trusts. Is leaving your possessions and your lands in the hands of someone else, and it's a Saxon tradition, but it led to banks, and it also led to people not paying taxes because they're holding on to the property of somebody else. And then, so you have $60 million or $160 million or whatever in an island somewhere being held by some guy who's he's getting paid $20,000 a year just to live in the Caribbean or whatever it is. And a lot of people's money is just being held there. Yeah, right. But the thing is, it's you have to you probably have to be part of, yeah, you don't want to be signed up. You of all people know. Like, yeah.
If it was a good cause,
right?
Everything else is there. Who wouldn't want to just be?
Yeah. Well, hey.
On an island,
Hey, man, that's a real hypothetical. That's a rigid hypothetical right there. Because I think also the Panama Papers
documentary. That's where I would like to take all the Christians I could gather that I could convince. Don't go to the protest. Don't go to fight. How did Chief Joseph live? He ran away. How did Haile Selassie live through World War II? One of the only emperors to make it. He ran away and hid, not in Wakanda, but somewhere probably pretty close.
There's a great documentary, Alex Winters, who's from Bill and Ted, dude, actually made, and it's become pretty big this year, and it's all about the Panama Papers and in general the leak of information about the $277 billion being held over in Panama. And that's just one taste, but it really gives you a look into that network of corruption. But it's fantastic.
Well, how much money are they storing up right now with our social security numbers? When we die, we don't get that money. It goes back to the state.
Well, a lot of that is held as an insurance.
With diabetes and everything else, there's no pensions for anybody. That's their money.
Well, okay, so there's a little bit there, and it's on purpose. The whole thing exists just as a backup security situation, just in case, because they need to have something there. But they can take it out and they use it for themselves most of the time, and that's pretty much what it's for. But what it is it's sort of like the half of a slave. They own the other half of you, and they hold that money for you, and it's because they don't trust you to spend it right, so they spend it themselves, essentially, on municipal funds. I mean, they spend that on agenda pushing stuff a lot of the time, like sterilization campaigns and whatever. But they or the roads,
vaccines, Bill Gates, giving people polio and
or HPV vaccines, whatever it takes. But they'll make you feel like they're doing you a favor. But what they're doing with that money is technically, in their minds, a community fund. And that's why it's held that way. It's also because of I think Robert Owens, right? So we think a lot of Marx too much, I think. And is that right? Robert Owens Robert Owen was a Welsh textile manufacturer, philanthropist, and a social reformer. And he was a founder of utopian socialism during the cooperative movement. And essentially what he did was he bought a bunch of land and he put a bunch of women on the property working, and he gave them houses and he housed them. He didn't let them leave, and basically it kept them from getting in trouble or getting drunk. And they had curfew at night, and it was called an Owenite utopian community. And eventually he came.
Was that Oneida where they made the silverware?
Could very well be. I wouldn't be surprised.
Was that in New York?
Well, he was originally in Scotland and in England, and then he came from Manchester to the Americas, and he created New Harmony, which was the village in Indiana. And that's where you've heard of Thoreau's, Emerson's collapsed society.
Right.
That's that. They were trying to take over an Owenite society, and the thing is, it would have worked if it was left up to Owen, because he was going to make it a business. It's like a cult, but they wanted.
I heard a number of those, like the Amana colonies. They ended up making refrigerators and stuff like that. They came over to found a utopian society.
Right, and
the Quakers.
there's a lot of evidence there that it makes sense that you guarantee a certain amount of work, a certain amount of self-determination, so that people can't be forced to do things they don't want to do, but they're also able to practice the things they want to do. I mean, like there's a lot there that actually says that's a better system than a forced dictatorship of the majority oppressing a minority. You know, a democracy might be more of a weapon. It's more of a weapon than a system.
What did they do in X? You know, they all came together, and no man had his own thing. Everything was in common.
Right.
So it all those times and those that you're mentioning were from the 1800s to World War I, and especially if you're getting into Thoreau, it's right at the start of going up to the World War I.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I definitely find Thoreau to be. I don't like Thoreau. He's scary. Thoreau's a bad guy.
I want to just emphasize this one point that those utopians, they paid for that themselves. They had their own laws. People couldn't just come in and get them. Same with Hershey's company towns, the mining towns, everything that we showed. The federal government was weak then. The towns, if Chicago said you're not coming in, you didn't come in. You had to change trains. And it was only in between the wars where we ended up. Oh yeah, and the government's in charge of everything, and it's always been in charge of everything, and that's another big lie.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you see the pitchfork wielding people outside of Catherine the Great's castle, demanding to see who, that the emperor or the Romanov family is at least alive. I mean, they could stop anything. Yeah, they were. But
kings weren't passed on by birth automatically.
Right. Yeah.
They weren't.
And then matriarchies.
People didn't want Saul to kill Jonathan because he ate honey and got the energy to go save the whole army. Saul said, "No, we got to kill him. I got to keep my vow." Jonathan humbly said, "Well, go ahead, Dad." The people saved Jonathan. They said, "No, King, it don't work that way."
I want to get back to that because of to matriarchies, but I really quickly wanted to mention if you get a chance, rewatch this video, because while we're talking about Thoreau and stuff. I got to the New Moral World, which was a plan for the New Harmony Succession by Owen, and it's a star fort with a big box around it with a bunch of people living in it. It looks like with electric towers. I mean, it's everything, with columns, like it looks like a Tartarian star fort, but that's pretty interesting. But when you were talking about the ideas of patriarchy, that's another interesting thing, because it's not just that they weren't passed down from son to son to be kings, but also because the queen was so important in a matriarchy system, because men often died because they were, the jobs that they had were rather dangerous. And so women were often in charge of administration and accounting, which, a lot of why British wear the wigs is because they're dressing like Egyptians who are emulating, the females running the courts at the times of the administration during the times of Ptahhotep. And so it's interesting we've gotten to this point that's so convinced that, it's true. We have lived for a while now in a society that's very, I guess chauvinistic. It's in a sense maybe, but there's been so many more periods with Amazons according to our history. And it's like, that's really where it gets down to matriarchies. And it's funny because where are we today? We're in a matriarchy, because
it would appear.
I mean, there are people that work around it. There are men they're out of the icon. They're out of the sight because of that. But, she's able to maneuver more because of that.
There's something, and I don't want to open a can of worms because, in what I believe, men and women are mentally and everything equal. They're not physically equal. And it is their menstrual period, the only thing, because that affects their hormones, that kept them out of leadership. And I agree with that.
Well,
but it doesn't mean women.
I think that's actually the opposite. See, because the thing is, the period meant they had to stay and on the throne, and so it's really the men that are more expendable. So the women, they actually end up being forced to mitigate the economy, and the economy means running of the house. So what really we have is we have this society that superimposes on top of itself a taking over of this female-run civilization. That's what it looks like. They got to the city run by women, and then they killed the men that were outside of it that were guarding, or maybe they became them or something, and there's some sort of a coup. But I mean, there's a very interesting thing about the Hermetics, transsexualism, and their emulation of androgyny and of transvestites, right? Like
what have been doing it a long time.
Yeah, since they took over. And it seems like it might be because they're jealous of, they're basically saying that they're not good enough for either job. So, they can't be hunters and they can't be gatherers, but they also can't be birthers. So what they want to do is they want to take the powers from both and exist somewhere in the middle,
All I can say is it's a crime what women are being forced to try to believe that, like someone like, even though I'm 60 years old, Angelina Jolie could punch me at one time and I'd be knocked out, 10 feet, That's just such a bad, because most women are not Amazons.
Yeah, I feel like she could probably, she's a witch, so I bet she's got magic powers. But yeah, other than that, I think.
But they want every girl to believe that they could do that.
Right.
Now, whether that girl is healthy or strong, in her mind, she's thinking,
well,
if I got motivated, if I got off the couch and did some push-ups, I could beat up any guy.
I think,
and that's just wrong.
I think, well, the thing is, the thing is, these days, you can take hormones and you can be impressed with that. It's not so much that you can't, it's more that, like, I think Chris Rock said, you can drive a car with your feet, you could raise a child by yourself, like, you as a teenager, like, but you probably shouldn't do it. Like, you can, it's possible, like, but like, there's a lot better things to do with your time, and there's other people that can do the thing that you want to do without it, hand tied behind their back or whatever. So it's like, often it's like, you can get a guy, if you're a girl. I've seen so many girls manipulate guys in bars into beating each other up. Like, that seems like a more powerful thing than just punching one guy in the face a few times, And it's like, just figuring out that you're not meant to do certain things because you're meant to do other things isn't really an impairment. It's just it's a metric of canvas.
Well, the whole world to me is upside down, that women are even alone in bars. There was a time, and I think that there would be something worth emulated when a father was proud of his admitted virgin daughter.
Right.
And that a girl wouldn't have to be told, I'm not giving it away tonight.
Yeah, and she wouldn't be cast in the street.
And a guy wouldn't be going, and any guy that like when I was young, if I knew that a girl would put out, I'd be thinking, I'm sure glad my sisters don't.
Right.
That's the attitude that we're missing. That's the attitude of what loving each other, guy or woman, as yourself should be, because you know what's best for them. Swiping right in any way, getting talked into you're a dominant or a submissive, is a false dichotomy. It's a false choice, because they never should have been offered. You're a nothing. You are a image of God creation that should save yourself, because you will never know intimacy.
So why is it you think that Islam? Why do you think Islam is the one these days that is keeping up with the Sharia? Like, why are they the ones that are all about modesty? And in a lot of ways, Islam holds a lot of things that are like, that really should be everybody's values. And then, but the thing is, they have all these other ones that shouldn't be. So it's like, it's funny that they're so many people look at them these days as the voice of reason because of that.
Well, it's simply because that's the way the Jesuits wrote their playbook.
Yeah.
The Muslims was just another name probably for Christians until the wars.
Yeah, I mean,
there is no big history. I mean, the 1,000-year reign of Christ was across the board.
Right. And it's just a kind of Christian.
Just rewrite it and say, this is what you guys believe, and if all of a sudden say, oh, this is what we believe, and the next thing you know, here comes forgive me, but here comes Whitey and their Rolls Royce tanks in World War I killing everybody. They'll say, "Oh yeah, you also think those guys are the bad guys." How hard is it going to be to whip them up? Not hard at all. They play us like fiddles. They've been studying the psychology of the human mind day and night for decades. They influence, they manipulate, they give us false options. Everybody knows everybody has common memories of songs, movies, this and that. It might as well be Neo waking up because we haven't had our own options. They've fed us what we have to think about because people dismiss the Bible and say, "Oh, this girl is so powerful on her own, that girl should be with the guy she loves, not out on her own. Her dad should have passed her off." And if people think that it is just shameful that somebody in the Bible would have came out and said, "Oh my goodness, here's the blood on the sheets of my virgin wife," I got a problem with that because what would be the wrong of saying,
well,
there's a girl worth dying for?
So also one of the things I was thinking about, the Yazidi, right? Because that's a big part of the Yazidi tribe of, they're the blonde kids that get raped by the ISIL and their ISIS, and they're trying to breed them out of existence. But there are a lot of these kids out there that are part of the Yazidi, and they had this belief in the peacock, right? And that the God created the architect who was the peacock, and the peacock cried. So it's interesting because they're looked at as supposed to be, the Muslims think that they're evil, and so they're not just murdering, they're murdering all the men and boys and raping all the girls and forcing, and trying to breed them into being in local, whatever, the new conquerors are. But it's interesting because their religion's very old, and it actually goes back, as far as I can tell, their Golden Yazidi book is like at least as old as the Old Testament, maybe around Enoch era. And it's correlated like this. It's basically what they're talking about in some of the Old Testament. And I think some of the Old Testament, I have to wonder if it's not written to make it look like that the stories are about heroes who are innocent constantly, and that like for instance Jericho, walking around Jericho without just they could have walked around Jericho. Why'd they have to destroy Jericho? The Bible doesn't really explain that. It's more like that they just destroyed Jericho because there was an earthquake and they just sacked the place, and they're like, well, God gave it to us, and that's awesome. But maybe it's that there's straight up, but they don't really show that Jericho's evil, and so it's like there's a lot of stories of just conquering people that we can find that are probably true and are not necessarily about them being heroes.
Well, there is the thing in the Bible where he said go in and destroy them. It was because they weren't following his law, and the people that went in, why they're judged harder is because they knew that's why they went in, and then they didn't follow the law either. They had everything provided for them, and then they didn't do it either. But then anybody that came in, they expected them to do it better than they would have. It wasn't, for me, it's a sensitive subject because I don't want it to be that, oh, God just chose those towns because that was where the giant 2-seed DNA was.
Right.
No, it was always about God is a jealous God because he is the only one that can be jealous because he really does have our best interest at heart. If we would be thinking about him, we wouldn't be wrong. A jealous wife or a jealous husband is bad because they're not God and they want all the attention. This is God. He knows what's right.
So I want to.
There are hidden things and there are revealed things. What's revealed is we should be as pure as we can and try to honor God before ourselves. So
that's basically. I want to kind of wrap it up around that. I think that's where we should kind of finish it. And that's kind of what I want to talk about is, can we get a visual really quickly of the Gilded Age of the Crusades? What is the kind of technology that we had during Christ, you know, and what is like, for instance, you had that video where you showed the pentelegram, and I'm just wondering, what do you think kind of stuff existed when Christ was around? What's some of the pentelegram?
I do believe that they had, you know, probably. I mean, I just saw in the paper yesterday there's a guy who's making a compressed air car where he thinks you can get 600 miles to a tank.
Right. Yeah.
I think as soon as we get back to steam power, we're going to be surprised how easy it was for them to balloon around, get around. The donkeys and horses, they liked them.
Mm-hmm.
They're still. Why do they still have Westminster dog shows? There's not enough dog breeds already. No, they're into breeding and seeing what they can do. It's part of their gig. But yeah, they had those fascistas and electric power and things like that. It was a good time from beginning to end. There is nothing new under the sun, say the prophet.
So that's kind of, I think, just the most, I think some of the most important stuff for people to get their hands on who are not yet interested enough in this comic book that we call the Bible, because it's got
right, and you're starting
here
off
now.
with a guy that was a hyper purity guy too, so there's going to be a lot of people just turned off by the dogmaticism of my message.
Yeah, but so I think that that's the thing. If we keep going back and forth, like, the thing is, it's like, it's not about that so much, because you're talking about important stuff and people are going to get to that point. It's like, if people aren't ready, they're not going to listen to you. So that's why a lot of the stuff, I'm like, hey, they're going to like you, and they're going to
catch up on Starports,
yeah,
canals.
They got to go to your channel, man. Like, people got to check out your work, because you got a lot.
Find gold in the body.
I mean,
I know that gold is the ganglion nerves. The gemstones and the golden heart, that's how we're going to be judged.
But
it's all right there in the mountains, brother.
I'll tell anybody who, you know, thinks that they can't, you know, that they can't glean anything from this man I'm talking to right now, that, like, I'm gonna go ahead and say I fact checked this stuff, and it's real. Like, there's yeah, it's completely real, guys, and you got to really look into it, because, you know, even if you got to, like, read it yourself and put your hands in it yourself, yeah, I mean, it's happening. So
this is the end time, brother Andreas. God bless you times 10 on your new show, and I hope the Lord is just with you all the way, and that you're with him, brother.
I thank you so much. I'm trying to do my best to keep on that, and likewise, I can tell you are too. So thank you so much. And people,
congratulations on all of your success. I think you've earned it.
People, make sure you check out the Tartaria channel. Say it again, because I have a hard time.
Just Flat Earth Nation.
Flat Earth Nation. Flat Earth Nation. All right, Flat Earth Nation, guys. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Andrew.